right back. Samuel?
Exodus chapter 14. God spoke to Moses. Tell the Israelites to turn around and make camp at Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. Camp on the shore of the sea, opposite Baal Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are lost. They're confused. The wilderness has closed in on them. Then I'll make Pharaoh's heart stubborn again, and he'll chase after them, and I'll use Pharaoh and his army to put my glory on display. Then the Egyptians will realize that I am God. And that's what happened. When the king of Egypt was told that the people were gone, he and his servants changed their minds. They said, "What have we done letting Israel, our slave labor, go free?" So he had his chariots harnessed up and got his army together. He took 600 of his best chariots with the rest of the Egyptian chariots and their drivers coming along. God made Pharaoh, king of Egypt, stubborn, determined to chase the Israelites as they walked out on him without even looking back. The Egyptians gave chase and caught up with them where they had made camp by the sea. All Pharaoh's horse-drawn chariots and their riders, all his foot soldiers, there at Pi Hahiroth, opposite Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up and saw them Egyptians coming at them. They were totally afraid. They cried out in terror to God. They told Moses, "Weren't the cemeteries large enough in Egypt so that you had to take us out here in the wilderness to die? What have you done to us taking us out of Egypt? Back in Egypt, didn't we tell you this would happen? Didn't we tell you? Leave us alone here in Egypt. We're better off as slaves in Egypt than as corpses in the wilderness." Moses spoke to the people, "Don't be afraid. Stand firm and watch God do his work of salvation for you today. Take a good look at the Egyptians today, for you're never going to see them again. God will fight the battle for you. And you keep your mouth shut." Your mouth shut. God said to Moses, Why cry out to me? Speak to the Israelites. Order them to get moving. Hold your staff high and stretch your hand out over the sea. Split the sea. The Israelites will walk through the sea on dry ground. Meanwhile, I'll make sure the Egyptians keep up their stubborn chase. I'll use Pharaoh and his entire army, his chariots and horsemen, to put my glory on display so that the Egyptians will realize that I am God. The angel of God that had been leading the camp of Israel now shifted and got behind them. And the pillar of cloud that had been in front also shifted to the rear. The cloud was now between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. The cloud enshrouded one camp in darkness and flooded the other with light. The two camps didn't come near each other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and God, with a terrific east wind all night long, made the sea go back. He made the sea dry ground. The sea waters split. The Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground with waters a wall to the right and to the left. The Egyptians came after them in full pursuit. Every horse and chariot and driver of Pharaoh racing into the middle of the sea. It was now the morning watch. God looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud on the Egyptian army and threw them into a panic. He clogged the wheels of their chariots. They were stuck in mud. The Egyptians said, "Run from Israel! God is fighting on their side and against Egypt." God said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, and the waters will come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots, over their horsemen." Moses stretched his hand out over the sea. As the day broke and the Egyptians were running, the sea returned to its place as before. God dumped the Egyptians in the middle of the sea. The waters returned, drowning the chariots and riders of Pharaoh's army that had chased after Israel into the sea. Not one of them survived. But the Israelites walked right through the middle of the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall to the right and to the left. God delivered Israel that day from the oppression of the Egyptians, and Israel looked at the Egyptian dead, washed up on the shore of the sea, and realized the tremendous power that God brought against the Egyptians. The people were in reverent awe before God and trusted in God and his servant Moses. Exodus chapter 15. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to God, giving voice together. I'm singing my heart out to God. What a victory! He pitched horse and rider into the sea. God is my strength. God is my song. And yes, God is my salvation. This is the kind of God I have, and I'm telling the world, this is God of my father. This is the God of my father. I'm spreading the news far and wide. God is a fighter, pure God, through and through. Pharaoh's chariots and army he dumped in the sea. The elite of his officers he drowned in the Red Sea. Wild ocean waters poured over them. They sank like a rock in the deep blue sea. Your strong right hand, God, shimmers with power. Your strong right hand shatters the enemy. In your mighty majesty, you smash your upstart enemies. You let loose your hot anger and burn them to a crisp. At a blast from your nostrils, the waters piled up, tumbling streams dammed up, wild oceans curdled into a swamp. The enemy spoke. I'll pursue, I'll hunt them down, I'll divide up the plunder, I'll gut myself on them, I'll pull out my sword, my fist will send them reeling. You blew with all your might, and the sea covered them. They sank like a lead weight in the majestic waters. Who compares with you among gods, O God? Who compares with you in power, in holy majesty, in awesome praises, wonder-working God? You stretched out your right hand, and the earth swallowed them up. But the people you redeemed, you led in merciful love. You guided them under your protection to your holy pasture. When people heard, they were scared. Philistines writhed and trembled. Yes, even the headmen in Edom were shaken, and the big bosses in Moab. Everybody in Canaan panicked and fell faint. Dread and terror sent them reeling before your brandished right arm. They were struck dumb like a stone until your people crossed over and entered, O God. Until the people you made crossed over and entered. You brought them and planted them on the mountain of your heritage, the place where you live, the place you made, your sanctuary, Master, that you established with your own hands. Let God rule forever, for eternity. Yes, Pharaoh's horses and chariots and riders went into the sea, and God turned the waters back on them. But the Israelites walked on dry land, right through the middle of the sea. Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine, and all the women followed her with the tambourines dancing. Miriam led them in singing. Sing to God, what a victory! He pitched horse and rider into the sea. Moses led Israel from the Red Sea on to the wilderness of Shur. They traveled for 3 days through the wilderness without finding any water. They got to Marah, but they couldn't drink the water at Marah. It was bitter. That's why they called the place Marah, bitter. And the people complained to Moses, "So what are we supposed to drink?" So Moses cried out in prayer to God. God pointed him to a stick of wood. Moses threw it into the water, and the water turned sweet. That's the place where God set up rules and procedures. That's where he started testing them. God said, if you listen obediently to how God tells you to live in his presence, obeying his commandments and keeping all his laws, then I won't strike you with all the diseases that I inflicted on the Egyptians. I am God, your leader. I am God, your healer. They came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. They set up camp there by the water. Exodus chapter 16. On the 15th day of the second month, after they had left Egypt, the whole company of Israel moved on from Elim to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. The whole company of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron there in the wilderness. The Israelites said, why didn't God let us die in comfort in Egypt, where we had lamb stew and all the bread we could eat? You've brought us out into this wilderness to starve us to death, the whole company of Israel. God said to Moses, I'm going to rain bread down from the skies for you. The people will go out and gather each day's ration. I'm going to test them to see if they'll live according to my teaching or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they have gathered, it will turn out to be twice as much as their daily ration. Moses and Aaron told the people of Israel, this evening you will know that it is God who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of God. Yes, he's listened to your complaints against him. You haven't been complaining against us, but against God. Moses said, since it will be God who gives you meat for your meal in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, it's God who will have listened to your complaints against him. Who are we in all of this? You haven't been complaining to us, you've been complaining to God. Moses instructed Aaron, tell the whole company of Israel, come near to God. He's heard your complaints. When Aaron gave out the instructions to the whole company of Israel, they turned to face the wilderness, and there it was, the glory of God, visible in the cloud. God spoke to Moses, I've listened to the complaints of the Israelites. Now tell them, at dusk you will eat meat, and at dawn you'll eat your fill of bread, and you'll realize that I am God, your God. That evening quail flew in and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew all over the camp. When the layer of dew had lifted, there on the wilderness ground was a fine flaky something, fine as frost on the ground. The Israelites took one look and said to one another, manna? What is it? They had no idea what it was. So Moses told them, it's the bread God has given you to eat. And these are God's instructions. Gather enough for each person, about 2 quarts per person. Gather enough for everyone in your tent. The people of Israel went to work and started gathering, some more, some less. But when they measured out what they had gathered, those who gathered more had no extra, and those who gathered less weren't short. Each person had gathered as much as was needed. Moses said to them, don't leave any of it until morning, but they didn't listen to Moses. A few of the men kept back some of it until morning. It got wormy and smelled bad, and Moses lost his temper with them. They gathered it every morning, each person according to need. Then the sun heated up and it melted. On the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, about 4 quarts per person. Then the leaders of the company came to Moses and reported. Moses said, this is what God was talking about. Tomorrow is a day of rest, a holy Sabbath to God. Whatever you plan to bake, bake today, and whatever you plan to boil, boil today. Then set aside the leftovers until morning." They set aside what was left until morning, as Moses had commanded it. It didn't smell bad, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, "Now eat it. This is the day, a Sabbath for God. You won't find any of it on the ground today. Gather it every day for 6 days, but the 7th day is Sabbath. There won't be any of it on the ground." On the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather anyway, but they didn't find anything. God said to Moses, "How long are you going to disobey my commands and not follow my instructions? Don't you see that God has given you the Sabbath? So on the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. So each of you stay home. Don't leave home on the 7th day." So the people quit working on the 7th day. The Israelites named it manna. "What is it?" "It looks like coriander seed, whitish, and it tasted like a cracker with honey." Moses said, "This is God's command. Keep a 2-quart jar of it, an omer for future generations, so they can see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness after I brought you out of Egypt." Moses told Aaron, "Take a jar and fill it with 2 quarts of manna. Place it before God, keeping it safe for future generations." Aaron did what God commanded Moses. He set it aside before the testimony to preserve it. The Israelites ate the manna for 40 years until they arrived at the land where they would settle down. They ate manna until they reached the border into Canaan. According to ancient measurements, an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. Amen.